Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. A region so hostile that your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, where car tires shatter like ceramic plates, and where the locals have a saying, if you spit, it freezes before it hits the ground. We're heading to Yakutia, specifically the village of Oymyakon in Russia's Sakha Republic, where the temperature has plummeted to minus 71.2 degrees Celsius minus 96.2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not a typo. That's colder than the surface of Mars on a mild day. You're about to experience what it means to survive in a place where exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes, where going outside requires the same level of preparation as a spacewalk, and where the only thing standing between you and crystallization is layers of fur, a proximity to large mammals, and an ironclad will to see another sunrise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the global bedtime crowd roll in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the small prop plane onto a runway that isn't paved. It's carved ice, polished by wind and use, gleaming under weak January sunlight that barely crests the horizon. It's 2 p.m., but the sun looks exhausted, like it's already giving up for the day. The cold hits you immediately, not like winter back home, but like a physical entity, something with weight and intention. Your first breath sears your nostrils shut. The moisture in your nasal passages flash freezes, and you instinctively gasp, which is a mistake, because now the inside of your throat feels like you've swallowed ground glass. Welcome to Oymyakon, population around 500, depending on the season and who's still alive. The name Oymyakon comes from the Sakha language. Some say it means unfrozen water, referring to a nearby thermal spring where reindeer herders once watered their animals. Others argue it translates closer to place where fish overwinter. Historians still argue whether the village was named for survival or irony, because unfrozen is the last word anyone would use to describe this place 9 months of the year. You're standing at approximately 63 degrees north latitude, nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains that trap cold air like a freezer with a broken door seal. It's a geographical nightmare, a perfect storm of elevation, latitude, and topography that conspires to create the coldest temperatures ever recorded in a permanently inhabited location. Your guide, a man named Mikhail who looks like he's made of leather and stoicism, gestures toward a battered Soviet-era van idling nearby. The engine has been running for 3 days straight. We never turn off engines in winter, he says in accented English, his words emerging in visible clouds that hang in the air like speech bubbles in a comic strip. If engine stops, it never starts again. Metal becomes like glass. He's not exaggerating. At these temperatures, metal contracts, lubricants turn to sludge, and rubber loses all flexibility. Your phone, which you foolishly pulled out to take a photo, has already died, its lithium-ion battery surrendering to the cold like a defeated army. The village itself looks like a film set for a post-apocalyptic movie. Wooden houses with tiny windows, their walls layered 3 deep with insulation. Chimneys pumping smoke into air so cold it doesn't rise but pools around the rooftops in lazy, frozen swirls. Icicles the size of telephone poles hang from eaves, and you notice something odd. There are no power lines above ground. Everything is buried, because exposed wiring becomes brittle and snaps in the cold like overcooked spaghetti. The streets are empty except for a few figures moving quickly, bundled in so many layers they look like ambulatory haystacks. You're wearing what you thought was adequate thermal underwear, fleece layers, a down jacket, insulated boots. Mikhail looks at your outfit and laughs, not unkindly. You will learn, he says, which is possibly the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said to you. Within 10 minutes of standing outside, you understand. The cold here isn't just cold, it's predatory. It finds the gaps in your clothing, the space between your glove and your sleeve, the quarter-inch of exposed skin at your collar. Probes like a living thing, searching for warmth to extinguish. Your eyeglasses, if you're wearing them, fog instantly and then freeze, creating a layer of ice that renders you effectively blind. Contact lenses? Forget it, the saline solution would freeze to your corneas. Your lungs start to ache. A deep, persistent burn that makes you wonder if you're actually damaging yourself with every breath. You are, at minus 71 degrees Celsius. Inhaling deeply can cause ice crystals to form in your lungs, leading to a condition that's basically frostbite of your respiratory system. The locals breathe shallowly through scarves, pre-warming the air before it reaches their lungs, a technique you're now desperately trying to copy. Mikhail leads you toward what he calls the warm room, a small structure attached to his house that serves as an airlock between the apocalyptic exterior and the merely cold interior. Even houses here are built in layers, with entry chambers where you can gradually transition between temperature zones. Bursting directly from minus 71 degrees Celsius outside into a heated room would be dangerous. The thermal shock can cause physical damage, and the sudden humidity makes ice form instantly on your clothing, creating a shell that actually makes you colder. It's a whole science, this business of moving between environments. Inside the airlock, you begin the process of delayering, and you notice your outer garments are completely rigid, frozen into the shape of your body like a textile sculpture. Your scarf has a coating of ice from your frozen breath. Your eyelashes, you discover when you look in a small mirror, are white with frost, giving you the appearance of an elderly snow creature. Mikhail nods approvingly at your frosted appearance. "Now you look like Yakutian," he says with what might be pride. The inner room is warm, well, relatively. It's maybe 15 degrees Celsius, 59 degrees Fahrenheit, which after the outside feels like a sauna. A wood stove dominates one corner, its belly glowing red, fed continuously with logs. Heat is currency here, more valuable than rubles. Mikhail's family burns through approximately 4 cubic meters of firewood per week during the coldest months. And that's with a house that's insulated to standards that would make a thermos jealous. The windows are triple-paned with an air gap between each layer, and there's small heat escapes through glass, so you minimize the glass. You learn that Oymykon's claim to extreme cold fame comes from February 6, 1933, when a temperature of minus 67.7 degrees Celsius minus 89.9 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded. But locals insist it's gotten colder. The minus 71.2 degrees Celsius reading is unofficial, taken by residents with their own thermometers, because at a certain point, official meteorological equipment simply stops working. Mercury thermometers freeze solid at minus 38.8 degrees Celsius. So anything colder requires alcohol-based thermometers, and those have their own limitations. There's something darkly funny about living in a place so cold that thermometers themselves give up and die. But here's the thing that starts to dawn on you as you thaw. People live here. Not temporarily, not as some extreme challenge, but as home. Children attend school. Families celebrate holidays. People fall in love, argue about groceries, complain about their neighbors. The mundane machinery of human life continues, just wrapped in so many layers of fur and desperation that it's almost unrecognizable. Mikhail's daughter, a girl of maybe 8, walks through the room in wool socks and a sweater, completely unbothered by what you consider to be barely tolerable indoor temperatures. She's lived here her entire life. Her normal is your nightmare. You ask the obvious question, why? Why would anyone choose to live here? Mikhail considers this while pouring tea from a samovar that's been bubbling on the stove. "Why do you live where you live?" he counters. "This is home. My grandfather's grandfather lived here. The land provides. The cold." He pauses, searching for words. "The cold makes you strong, makes you pay attention. In warm places, people are soft, careless. Here, if you are careless, you die. So you learn to not be careless." It's a philosophy born of necessity, but there's also something deeper, a pride in surviving what shouldn't be survivable, in thriving where the planet itself seems to be actively hostile to human life. The Saka people, the indigenous inhabitants of this region, have lived in Yakutia for centuries, developing technologies and traditions specifically calibrated to this frozen world. They were here long before Russian expansion, before the Soviet Union, before anyone thought to put a thermometer in the ground and declare this the pole of cold. Outside, the sun is already setting, even though it's barely 3 p.m. In December and January, daylight lasts maybe 3 hours, a pale, slanting illumination that provides light but precious little warmth. The darkness here isn't just an absence of light. It's a presence, a thick, smothering entity that seems to make the cold even colder. Your circadian rhythms, evolved for temperate zones with reasonable day-night cycles, are about to have a complete meltdown. Mikhail's wife brings out food, slices of raw, frozen fish called stroganina, shaved thin and eaten with salt. It's a delicacy here, and you quickly understand why. In a place where refrigeration is redundant 9 months of the year, fresh fish is simply fish that's been kept outside. The texture is strange, crunchy with ice crystals, but the flavor is clean and pure. There's also horse meat, boiled and served with potatoes, and a soup so thick with fat it forms a layer on top that insulates the liquid below, keeping it hot longer. Every aspect of the cuisine is calibrated for caloric density and heat retention. As you eat, you become aware of sounds outside, the crack and groan of contracting wood, the occasional sharp report like a gunshot as frozen tree sap explodes. The cold here is never quiet. It's a constant presence, announced by crystalline sounds, by the crunch of snow compressed to the density of concrete under your boots, by the way your voice sounds flat and dead because the air is too cold to carry sound properly. You're starting to understand that survival at minus 71 degrees Celsius isn't a single skill. It's an entire knowledge system, a complex web of techniques, traditions, and technologies that have evolved over generations. And you're about to learn that the real challenge isn't just surviving the cold. It's surviving it day after day, maintaining your humanity and sanity in a place where nature has made it abundantly clear that humans were never meant to exist. You wake at what your frozen phone insists is 7 a.m., though the darkness outside suggests otherwise. The sun won't attempt an appearance for another 2 hours, and even then it'll be a half-hearted gesture, a pale disk that barely clears the horizon before giving up entirely. But morning routines in Oymyakon don't wait for daylight, they can't. The cold has been working all night, tightening its grip on everything, and the first hours of the day are dedicated to a battle against entropy itself. The house is cold, not outside cold, but cold enough that you can see your breath. The wood stove burned down to embers overnight because keeping it fully stoked 24/7 would require someone on constant fire duty, and even Yakutians need sleep. Mikhail is already up, dressed in layers, feeding logs into the stove with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done this 10,000 times. The wood is stacked inside the house because wood stored outside becomes so frozen it won't burn properly. The moisture in the cells turns to ice, and frozen wood just smolders and smokes instead of producing heat. Your first task, Mikhail explains, is dealing with the water situation. There's no running water in winter because pipes buried even 2 meters deep would freeze and burst. The permafrost here extends down hundreds of meters, and while that keeps the ground stable for building, it also means there's no below the frost line deep enough to protect infrastructure. Instead, water is delivered by truck to a large tank outside, or families cut blocks of ice from the nearby river and melt them on the stove. Mikhail's family does both, hedging their bets. You follow him outside into the pre-dawn darkness, armed with a headlamp and wearing so many layers you waddle like a penguin. The temperature has actually risen overnight. It's now only minus 65 degrees Celsius, practically balmy. Your guide hands you an axe and points to a sled loaded with river ice blocks, each about the size of a microwave, perfectly clear and dense. We bring in 10-12 blocks per day, he says. For drinking, cooking, washing. You do the math. That's roughly 120 liters of water, which seems like a lot until you consider that a family of 5 uses water for everything you use it for, just with the added step of converting it from solid to liquid first. The ice blocks are stacked near the house, and your job is to split them into smaller pieces that will fit in the large pot on the stove. You swing the axe, and the ice doesn't split. It shatters, exploding into crystalline shards that spray everywhere, glittering in your headlamp beam like tiny stars. The cold makes everything brittle. At these temperatures, molecular bonds lose their flexibility, and materials behave in ways that seem almost alien. The ice shards cut through your gloves, not through the material, but the cold itself is so intense it penetrates the fabric, making your fingers ache within seconds. Inside again, breathing hard, you help load the ice chunks into the massive pot. It'll take hours to melt, and the melted water will need to be carefully managed. some for drinking, some for cooking, a small amount for washing. Baths are weekly affairs at best, usually involving a banya, sauna, setup that requires heating an entirely separate structure. Daily hygiene here means strategic application of warm, damp cloths and a lot of acceptance that you're going to smell like wood smoke and wool for months. Next comes the vehicle situation, and this is where things get truly bizarre. Mikhail's van, remember, has been running for 3 days straight. But he also has a truck, and that one was shut off 2 days ago for maintenance. Starting it now requires a ritual that looks like something between automotive repair and arcane magic. First, you drain the oil, yes, drain it, because cold oil becomes a tar-like substance that the engine can't pump. The oil is brought inside and warmed by the stove until it returns to something approaching liquid consistency. Then you heat the engine block itself. There are several methods for this, and none of them would pass any safety inspection anywhere else on Earth. Some people build small fires underneath their vehicles, literally. Others use blow torches, carefully warming the metal until it's no longer cold enough to shatter. Mikhail uses a more modern approach. A diesel-powered heater that blows hot air directly onto the engine through a specially designed duct system. It takes 2 hours of continuous heating before the engine is warm enough to even attempt to start. You watch, fascinated and horrified, as he pours the warmed oil back in, installs a battery that's been kept indoors overnight. Cold batteries have maybe 20% of their normal capacity, and hits the ignition. The engine turns over with a grinding sound like a garbage disposal eating silverware. Once, twice. On the third attempt, it catches, coughs, and roars to life with a cloud of exhaust so thick it's practically solid. Mikhail revs it gently, keeping it alive, and you notice the exhaust isn't rising. It's freezing in midair, creating a low-lying fog of ice crystals that drifts around the truck like a special effect. The truck will now run until spring, or until something catastrophically breaks. Turning it off is not an option. School, incredibly, is still in session, though there's a temperature cutoff. If it drops below -52 degrees Celsius, elementary students stay home. Middle and high school students, they're expected to show up unless it hits -56 degrees Celsius. You watch as children emerge from houses looking like tiny astronauts, bundled in traditional Saka fur clothing, reindeer hide coats with the fur turned inward for maximum insulation, boots made from horse or reindeer leg skin, which is naturally waterproof, and hats that cover everything except their eyes. They move quickly, in groups, heading toward the school building, which is kept at a toasty 18 degrees Celsius, practically tropical by local standards. The walk to school is maybe 400 meters for most kids, but it's a serious journey. Parents watch from windows, timing it. 5 minutes is the maximum exposure time before frostbite becomes a real risk. The children know this. They've been training for this their entire lives. They breathe through scarves, keep moving, and don't dawdle. There's no such thing as walking slowly here. You move with purpose or you pay the price. Mikhail's daughter, Sina, is getting ready for school, and you watch her preparation routine with something like awe. She's 8 years old and executing a cold weather protocol that would challenge most adults. First, thermal underwear, then wool pants and a wool sweater, then a second layer of pants, then the reindeer fur coat, which weighs maybe 5 kilos and makes her look twice her actual size. Boots with 3 layers of insulation, mittens over gloves, a hat that ties under her chin, a scarf wrapped 3 times around her face. By the time she's done, only her eyes are visible, and she looks completely unbothered by the entire production. "I'm going to be late," she announces, and waddles toward the door. You ask if you can walk her to school, and Mikhail considers this before nodding. "Stay close," he says. "Move fast." You bundle up in your inadequate tourist gear and step outside with Sina and 2 neighbor children who've arrived at the door. The cold is a slap, as always, but you're slightly more prepared this time. You've learned to breathe shallowly, to keep your mouth shut, to move the air through your nose where it can be slightly warmed by your nasal passages before hitting your lungs. The children move at a rapid walk, almost a jog, their breath creating small clouds that freeze instantly and fall to the ground as ice crystals. Yes, the stories are true. When it's cold enough, your breath crystallizes audibly, a faint tinkling sound like tiny wind chimes. is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The snow underfoot isn't like snow anywhere else. It's been compressed and frozen so many times it's basically ice concrete, and it squeaks when you walk on it, a distinctive sound that occurs only below about -40 degrees Celsius when ice crystals are forced past each other under pressure. The school building appears through the darkness like an oasis, every window blazing with light. There's an elaborate entryway system, an outer door, then a hallway, then another door, creating an airlock that prevents cold air from flooding the interior. The children strip off their outer layers with practiced efficiency, revealing regular kids underneath, giggling and chattering about homework and friends and completely normal childhood concerns. The disconnect is dizzying. Outside is a frozen hellscape. Inside is just school. The teacher, a woman named Olga who's been teaching here for 20 years, greets you with curiosity. "You're the tourist?" she asks, and there's warmth in her voice but also a kind of gentle mockery. Tourists are rare in winter. Most visitors come in summer when the temperature is a relatively pleasant 20 degrees Celsius and the sun never sets. Coming in winter marks you as either genuinely interested or genuinely insane. Do you want to see how we teach in the coldest school on Earth? The classroom is surprisingly well equipped. Computers, books, a smartboard connected to satellite internet. Because yes, even in Oymyakon, connectivity is expected. The curriculum is standard Russian education, with an added focus on Sakha language and culture. But there are adaptations. Science class includes extensive units on cold weather survival, practical physics of temperature and insulation, and the biological adaptations of Arctic animals. Geography lessons naturally emphasize extreme environments. Every subject is taught through the lens of you live in a place that's trying to kill you. Here's how knowledge keeps you alive. Olga explains that attendance is actually excellent, despite the conditions. Children here learn early that education is survival, she says. Understanding thermodynamics isn't abstract. It's the difference between life and death. Knowing how to calculate fuel consumption, how to navigate by stars during polar night, how to read weather signs, these are life skills. There's a pragmatism to education here that makes most curricula elsewhere seem almost quaintly theoretical. Back outside, you help Mikhail with the next morning task. Checking on livestock. Yes, livestock. The village keeps horses and cattle, breeds that have adapted to the extreme cold over generations. The horses are small, sturdy Yakutian horses with coats so thick they look like they're wearing fursuits. They're kept in barns that are insulated but not heated. Heating a barn would make the animals soft, vulnerable to the cold when they need to go outside. Instead, the barn is merely windproof, and the animal's own body heat, plus strategic use of thick straw bedding, keeps the temperature hovering around -30 degrees Celsius. Yes, the barn is 30 degrees below zero, and that's considered adequate shelter. The horses are eating, their breath creating a fog so thick inside the barn you can barely see them. They're fed a diet heavy in fat and protein, oats mixed with fish oil, hay that's been carefully stored to preserve maximum nutritional value. A horse at -71 degrees Celsius needs roughly 3 times the calories it would need at 15 degrees Celsius, just to maintain body temperature. These horses are essentially biological furnaces, burning food to produce heat in quantities that seem wasteful until you remember that heat is the only thing keeping their cells from crystallizing. You notice one horse standing close to a cow, their bodies pressed together, and Mikhail explains. They're sharing warmth, using each other as radiators. Animals here have learned collective survival. Horses, cows, even the half-wild dogs that roam the village edges all huddle together during the worst cold. And humans, you're beginning to understand, do the same. Not physically pressing together like the livestock usually, but through community structures, shared resources, and a mutual understanding that individualism in Oymyakon is a death sentence. The morning routine continues. Checking the outdoor thermometer, -68 degrees Celsius now, warming nicely. Bringing in more firewood, melting more ice, checking that the truck is still running. Each task is performed with meticulous attention because shortcuts kill. Historians still argue whether the human settlements in Yakutia represent adaptation or madness, whether choosing to live here demonstrates remarkable resilience or a fundamental refusal to accept reasonable limits. The locals don't care about the debate. They're too busy surviving to philosophize about it. By the time you return inside for breakfast, more horse meat, fried this time, with bread that was baked yesterday and frozen immediately for preservation. You've been awake for 3 hours and you're exhausted. The cold is physically draining in ways you didn't anticipate. Your body is burning calories at an astonishing rate just maintaining core temperature, and every moment outside requires intense concentration and physical effort. Your muscles ache from the constant tension of shivering and bracing against the cold. Mikhail watches you slump at the table and laughs, not unkindly. "First week is hardest," he says. "Your body doesn't know what to do, thinks it's dying." He's not entirely wrong. Your physiological systems, evolved for African savannas and Mediterranean coastlines, are in full emergency mode, dumping stress hormones, constricting blood vessels, sacrificing your extremities to preserve your core. You're fighting millions of years of evolution that's screaming, "This is not a viable habitat." But people have lived here for centuries, and they've developed morning routines that transform survival from desperate struggle into ordinary habit. You're watching a choreography perfected over generations, each movement calibrated to minimize heat loss and maximize efficiency. And you're starting to understand that surviving at -71 degrees Celsius isn't about heroic gestures or extreme endurance. It's about getting up every morning and executing the routine, day after day, until the routine becomes so automatic you can do it half asleep in the pre-dawn darkness of a polar winter. The architecture here doesn't just shelter people from the cold, it wages active warfare against it, and every building you see represents centuries of accumulated knowledge about how to create livable space in conditions that should, by any reasonable measure, make permanent habitation impossible. You're standing outside Mikhail's house in the relatively mild -64 degrees Celsius afternoon sunlight, and he's explaining construction techniques like he's describing fortifications against an invading army, which, in a sense, he is. "Foundation is everything," Mikhail says, gesturing to the wooden stilts that elevate his house roughly 1 meter off the ground. "If you build directly on permafrost, your house heat melts ground underneath. Ground becomes mud, unstable. House sinks, tilts, breaks apart." It's a lesson learned the hard way during early Soviet construction efforts, when engineers from Moscow arrived with standard building plans designed for temperate zones and watched their structures slowly collapse into thawing craters of their own creation. The stilts keep the house elevated, allowing air to circulate underneath, ensuring the permafrost stays frozen and stable. Your house, essentially, must not be allowed to warm the ground it sits on. Its architecture as refrigeration. The walls of Mikhail's house are a masterpiece of insulation technology that predates modern materials by centuries. The outer layer is wood planking, then a gap filled with sawdust and moss, natural insulators that trap air in millions of tiny pockets. Then another layer of wood, then another air gap, then the interior wall. Total thickness, roughly 40 centimeters, more than a foot of layered defense against the outside temperature. The roof is even thicker because heat rises and will find any escape route. Some older houses use traditional methods: dried grass, reindeer fur, and even soil piled half a meter deep, creating what looks like a sod house but functions as a thermal fortress. Windows are the weak point in any structure, and here they're treated with the suspicion they deserve. Mikhail's windows are triple-paned with air gaps between each pane, and they're small, maybe 40 centimeters square, just large enough to let in the minimal sunlight winter provides. Some families install additional winter windows, creating quadruple pane systems, and the space between the panes is sometimes filled with glycerin or oil to prevent frost formation. Even with all these precautions, frost still accumulates on the innermost pane, creating intricate ice crystal patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't evidence of heat bleeding out of your living space at an alarming rate. You visit the school building next, and it's a revelation in institutional architecture adapted for extremes. The building is rectangular, minimal surface area for its volume. Every extra square meter of wall is additional heat loss. The entrance is a 3-chamber airlock system. You enter the first door into a cold room, maybe -20 degrees Celsius, shed your heaviest outer layers, then pass through a second door into a transition room, around 0 degrees Celsius, remove more layers, and finally enter the heated interior, 18 degrees Celsius. This gradual transition prevents thermal shock and, more importantly, prevents moisture from your warm breath and body from flash freezing on the interior walls when cold air rushes in. The heating system is a combination of a central boiler burning coal, delivered once per year by truck convoy, and supplemental with stoves in each classroom. Redundancy is survival. If the central system fails, the wood stoves can keep the building above freezing. If you run out of coal, you can burn wood. The entire infrastructure operates on the principle that any single point of failure could be catastrophic, so there are backups for the backups. The coal storage is a massive bunker holding enough fuel for 6 months because supply lines here are fragile things, subject to weather, road conditions, and the whims of logistics chains stretched across thousands of kilometers of frozen wilderness. The village clinic is another architectural marvel, though clinic is generous. It's basically a reinforced house with medical supplies and a doctor who visits monthly, weather permitting. The building has its own generator, fuel-powered, never stops running in winter, because medical equipment can't tolerate power interruptions. The examination room is kept at an almost luxurious 22 degrees Celsius because hypothermic patients need warmth, and there's a small operating theater that's rarely used but exists because the nearest hospital is a 12-hour drive away when roads are passable, which they often aren't. Dr. Anastasia, who's currently in residence during her monthly rotation, shows you the cold injury treatment area with the weary air of someone who's seen every possible variation of frostbite. We have a classification system, she explains. First degree, numbness, white skin, treatable with gradual warming. Second degree, blistering, tissue damage, requires weeks of care. Third degree, tissue death, often requires amputation. She gestures to a poster on the wall showing various stages of frostbite in graphic detail that makes you queasy. Every child here memorizes this by age 6. They learn to recognize the signs before nerve damage makes them unaware they're freezing. The poster includes one particularly horrifying detail. At extreme cold, frostbite can occur in less than 90 seconds on exposed skin. Your fingers, toes, nose, ears, all the extremities your body will sacrifice to preserve core temperature, are in constant danger. Historians still argue whether the human settlements here should be considered an impressive triumph of adaptation or a form of collective insanity, given the constant risk of tissue damage from simply existing in the environment. Dr. Anastasia shrugs when you mention this. People climb mountains that kill them, she says. People live in deserts, in flood zones, near volcanoes. Humans are stubborn. We go where we're not wanted, and we survive anyway. You tour a newer house built just 5 years ago, and it represents the cutting edge of cold weather construction, or at least the cutting edge that's economically feasible here. The walls include modern insulation foam alongside traditional materials, vapor barriers to prevent moisture accumulation, and a ventilation system that's actually quite sophisticated. It pulls in fresh air, passes it through a heat exchanger warmed by outgoing stale air, so you get fresh oxygen without dumping all your precious heat outside. It's the same technology used in Antarctic research stations, adapted for civilian use. But the most striking feature is the entry system, an entire room dedicated to the transition between outside and inside. It's the size of a small bedroom with hooks for outer garments, a bench for removing boots, a thick carpet for your feet once they're free from their insulated prisons, and, most ingeniously, radiant floor heating that warms you from the ground up as you delayer. The room has its own wood stove, kept burning low, so your outer garments can dry and warm between uses. Putting on frozen clothing is a recipe for hypothermia, so everything must be kept in a state of relative warmth. The owner, a man named Dmitry who made money in the diamond mines and returned to build his dream house, explains his heating costs with a grimace. In January, I burned through about $800 in fuel, wood, and electricity. For a house this size in Moscow, maybe $150. He's proud of his home but realistic about its demands. The house requires constant attention. I check it every 3 hours through the night, stoves, temperature, moisture levels. A house here is not a possession. It's a relationship. It needs you as much as you need it. The community center is perhaps the most important building in Oymyakon, a large structure that serves as gathering place, emergency shelter, and social hub. It's built to hold the entire village population in crisis situations. If a massive storm hits, if temperatures drop beyond even the local threshold of tolerance, everyone retreats here. The building has enough emergency supplies to sustain 500 people for 2 weeks. Food, water, in the form of ice blocks, medical supplies, and fuel for the heating system. The walls are nearly a meter thick in places, and there are sleeping platforms that can be quickly assembled. You attend an evening gathering here, and it's surreal. People in sweaters and indoor clothes, children playing, someone playing an accordion, teenagers huddled around a laptop watching something on downloaded videos. Internet here is satellite-based and unreliable. It could be a community center anywhere, except that outside it's minus 69 degrees Celsius and stepping outside without proper protection would kill you in less than an hour. The contrast creates a strange cognitive dissonance. Normalcy in a bubble, surrounded by an environment so hostile it makes Mars look appealing. The village also has infrastructure that seems mundane until you consider the context. A school, obviously, but also a small store, a post office, and even a museum dedicated to the Pole of Cold designation, attracting the handful of extreme tourists who visit. Each building is its own fortress, connected to others by paths that are maintained obsessively, because a path that's not clear is a path that becomes impassable, and isolation in a scattered settlement is dangerous. The store is a fascinating study in extreme condition retail. Goods are delivered twice per year by truck when the winter roads are solid enough to support heavy vehicles. Yes, winter roads, roads that exist only when the ground is frozen hard enough to drive on. Summer makes the region largely inaccessible by land, so the store orders for 6 months at a time. Canned goods, dry goods, fuel, ammunition for hunting, clothing, medicine. Fresh produce is a fantasy. The store's warehouse is unheated. It's naturally refrigerated by the environment, and goods are stored outside in many cases, because why heat a space when the outside temperature is already below any commercial freezer setting? Prices are astronomical. A can of vegetables that costs $1 in Moscow costs $5 here. Fuel is even worse, transport costs multiply everything. But there's no alternative market, no competition, so you pay the price or you do without. The economic reality of Oymyakon is stark. Almost everything must be imported across vast distances, making basic survival expensive in ways that would cripple most families anywhere else. Many families supplement purchased goods with traditional practices. Hunting, fishing, gathering berries in the brief summer, preserving everything possible. The communications infrastructure is equally improvised and impressive. Satellite internet provides connectivity, though it's slow and weather-dependent. Cell service exists but is patchy. The post office still processes physical mail, which arrives by truck on the same supply runs that bring goods. There's a weird temporal lag to everything. Letters take weeks, packages take months, and information from the outside world arrives in chunks rather than streams. It's not quite isolation, but it's close. The newest addition to village infrastructure is a small helipad, used for medical emergencies and critical supply drops. A helicopter can reach Yakutsk, the regional capital, in about 2 hours, weather permitting. Weather permitting is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Helicopters can't fly in extreme cold. Metal becomes brittle, fuel doesn't atomize properly, engines fail. So evacuation is only possible when temperatures rise above about minus 50 degrees Celsius. If you have a medical emergency in colder conditions, you wait and hope or you die. There's no in-between. You visit one final building, a traditional Saka dwelling preserved as a living museum, showing how people lived before modern materials. It's a low structure, half buried in the earth for insulation, with walls made from logs chinked with moss and animal dung, dried. It's an excellent sealant, a ceiling covered with soil and grass, and a central hearth that provided heat, light, and cooking capability. The smoke vented through a hole in the roof that could be partially closed with a fur flap. Families would have lived in a single room, maybe 15 square meters, pressed together for warmth through the winter darkness. The curator, an elderly woman named Valentina, gestures around the cramped space. "My grandmother lived in house like this," she says. 20 people, 3 generations, all winter in this space. They survived. We have easier now, heat, electricity, multiple rooms. But the principle is same. Small space, thick walls, fire that never goes out, and people together. She smiles. Alone you die. Together you survive. Architecture teaches this lesson. As you leave the museum and step back into the minus 66 degrees Celsius evening, you realize that every building here is a ship, sealed against a hostile environment, maintaining a bubble of survivable atmosphere through constant vigilance and fuel expenditure. The architecture isn't beautiful in any traditional sense. There are no soaring spires, no aesthetic flourishes, no wasted space on form over function. But there's a brutal elegance to it, a perfect adaptation of structure to environment that represents humanity's stubborn refusal to accept limits on where we can make a home. You're sitting in Dr. Anastasia's clinic, stripped down to your thermal underwear while she examines the spots on your fingers where the skin has gone waxy and white. Superficial frostbite, she announces with the casual authority of someone who sees this daily. First degree, maybe early second. You're lucky. Lucky feels like a generous assessment when two of your fingertips have lost all sensation and look like they belong to a corpse. But compared to what happens to human tissue at minus 71 degrees Celsius when things go really wrong, you suppose she's right. The body at these temperatures, she continues, applying warming compresses with water heated to exactly body temperature, not hot, which would cause additional damage, is a machine operating outside its design specifications. Your core temperature, the holy grail that your body will defend at all costs, needs to stay around 37 degrees Celsius. Every system you possess is calibrated to maintain this narrow range. Drop below 35 degrees Celsius and you're hypothermic, your brain starts misfiring, your heart rhythm becomes erratic. Below 28 degrees Celsius and you'll likely die, your body's chemistry simply shutting down like an engine run without oil. The human body evolved for environments where cold meant maybe 10 degrees Celsius, where shelter and fire could create comfortable microclimates. Here, the temperature gradient between your core and the outside air is over 100 degrees. Your body is essentially trying to maintain a bonfire in a blizzard. The first defense mechanism kicks in within seconds of cold exposure. Vasoconstriction. Blood vessels in your extremities, fingers, toes, ears, nose, clamp down hard, reducing blood flow to these areas to minimize heat loss. It's a calculated sacrifice. Better to lose a finger than to lose core temperature and die. Your body is running a brutal triage operation, deciding in real time what's expendable. This is why your fingers went white and numb. Your body deliberately cut them off from the warm blood supply, letting them cool toward ambient temperature to preserve heat for your vital organs. But here's where it gets interesting and slightly horrifying. If the cold persists, your body initiates something called cold-induced vasodilation, or the hunting response. Every 5 to 10 minutes, blood vessels in your extremities briefly open, flooding frozen tissue with warm blood to prevent permanent damage, then clamp shut again. It's a compromise, a rhythm of sacrifice and rescue that prevents immediate frostbite while still conserving core heat. You can actually feel this if you pay attention. Waves of warmth and numbness cycling through your fingers. Historians still argue whether this response is an adaptation developed by cold climate populations or a universal human trait. But either way, it's your body's desperate attempt to have it both ways. Preserve core temperature and keep all your parts attached. Dr. Anastasia shows you diagrams of what happens at the cellular level when tissue freezes. Water inside cells begins forming ice crystals, sharp, jagged structures that puncture cell membranes like microscopic knives. As ice crystals grow, they draw water out of cells through osmosis, dehydrating and killing them. Blood vessels constrict so much they damage their own walls, leading to leaks and clots. The tissue becomes starved of oxygen, and damage cascades through the affected area. First-degree frostbite, like yours, she explains, affects only skin surface, uncomfortable but recoverable. Second degree reaches deeper, blisters, tissue damage, permanent sensitivity to cold. Third degree kills tissue completely. The flesh turns black, dies, must be removed. She shows you photographs from her files. With the patient's permission, she assures you, and you wish she hadn't. Fingers swollen to twice their normal size, blistered with fluid-filled sacs. Toes turned black and mummified, clearly dead. A nose reduced to a crater of necrotic tissue. These aren't from dramatic accidents or extreme mountaineering disasters. These are from people who simply stayed outside too long in Oymyakon winter, who underestimated the cold or overestimated their tolerance or just got unlucky with wind and wet clothing. The metabolic demands of staying warm here are staggering. Dr. Anastasia pulls out nutrition data. An adult male in Oymyakon winter needs roughly 4,500 to 5,000 calories per day, nearly double the standard recommendation. Your body is burning fuel at an incredible rate, generating heat through muscle contractions, shivering being the most obvious, through elevated metabolic rate, through basically running every system hot. Children need proportionally even more. Growing bodies plus heat generation equals caloric requirements that seem absurd until you remember that food is literally fuel and you're burning it to stay alive. The diet here reflects this reality. Every meal you've eaten has been heavy with fat and protein. Horse meat, reindeer, fish with the fat left on, butter in quantities that would horrify a cardiologist. Carbohydrates are present but secondary. Fat has 9 calories per gram versus 4 for protein or carbs. It's simply more efficient fuel. The traditional Saka diet was probably 50% fat or higher, and modern residents haven't strayed far from that ratio. Your arteries might not love it long-term, but your immediate survival depends on it. You accompany Dr. Anastasia on a house call to see a man who's developed what she suspects is cold-induced asthma. His lungs have been damaged by repeatedly breathing air cold enough to cause tissue inflammation. The respiratory system is particularly vulnerable, she explains as you trudge through the darkness. Air at -71 degrees Celsius is essentially a tissue irritant. Causes bronchospasm, inflammation, increased mucus production. Some people develop chronic conditions just from living here, the price paid in lung function for breathing this air year after year. The patient, an older man named Victor, breathes with a wheeze you can hear across the room. He spent his entire life in Yakutia, worked in the mines, hunted, survived conditions that would hospitalize most people. And now his lungs are giving up, scarred and inflamed from decades of crystalline air. The young ones breathe through scarves from birth, he rasps. We didn't know better, thought we were tough. Dr. Anastasia administers a bronchodilator and makes notes. The treatment is the same as anywhere, but the cause is unique to this place. Environmental damage from simply existing in your environment. There are other chronic issues specific to extreme cold. Skin becomes chronically dry, the air at these temperatures holds almost no moisture, and humidity inside heated buildings is often below 20%, desert levels. Lips crack and bleed. Noses bleed. Eyes dry out, requiring constant application of lubricating drops. Some people develop a condition informally called cold paniculitis, inflammation of fat tissue from cold exposure, causing painful lumps under the skin. Your body, it turns out, doesn't adapt perfectly to extremes. It just develops new and interesting ways to break down. The psychological effects are less documented but equally real. Seasonal affective disorder, SAD, hits hard in a place where the sun barely appears for months. Depression rates spike. Alcoholism is a significant problem, though Dr. Anastasia notes carefully that this is as much socioeconomic as environmental. Poverty, isolation, and limited opportunities would breed despair anywhere. But the darkness doesn't help. 20 hours of darkness, every day for months, she says. The body's circadian rhythms depend on light-dark cycles. Here, those cycles are broken. People sleep badly, wake unrest, struggle to maintain energy. We prescribe vitamin D, light therapy lamps, sometimes antidepressants. We do what we can. You learn about cold water exposure incidents, rare but terrifying. Fall through ice into water that's maybe 0 degrees Celsius, surrounded by air that's -70 degrees Celsius, and you have perhaps 90 seconds to get out before your muscles stop responding. The shock of cold water triggers gasping, uncontrolled hyperventilation that often leads to water inhalation and drowning. If you somehow avoid drowning, hypothermia sets in within minutes. Your core temperature drops catastrophically fast, your consciousness fades, and you die in what witnesses describe as looking almost peaceful. Just a person quietly shutting down. The treatment for severe hypothermia, if you get to someone in time, is counterintuitive. You warm them slowly, carefully, monitoring constantly. Warming too fast can cause afterdrop, cold blood from the extremities rushing back to the core, dropping core temperature further and potentially stopping the heart. You can also cause rewarming shock, where damaged tissues flood the bloodstream with toxins and potassium, triggering cardiac arrest. So victims are wrapped in blankets, given warm, not hot fluids if conscious, and warmed at a rate of maybe 1 degree Celsius per hour. It's agonizingly slow, but faster risks killing them in the attempt to save them. Dr. Anastasia mentions childbirth, and you realize you haven't thought about this biological inevitability. Pregnant women here face standard complications plus environmental ones. Late pregnancy requires staying warm, which is challenging, and the increased metabolic demands of carrying a child plus generating heat means caloric needs approaching 6,000 per day. Labor and delivery happen in the clinic or, in emergencies, at home with a midwife. Newborns are particularly vulnerable. Their body mass to surface area ratio is terrible for heat retention. They can't shiver effectively for the first few months, and their metabolic rate is already maxed out just growing. Infant mortality rates historically were high. Modern medicine has improved this, but raising a baby here remains an act of constant vigilance. There's a strange condition called cold urticaria, an allergic response to cold that causes hives, swelling, and in severe cases, anaphylaxis. Some people develop it spontaneously, others are born with it. In most of the world, it's a minor annoyance requiring you to avoid ice baths. Here, it's potentially lethal. Your environment is the allergen and you can't escape it. A few families have had to relocate permanently, driven out by their own immune systems. You ask about adaptation, whether people born here are genuinely better equipped physiologically than outsiders. Dr. Anastasia shrugs. Some evidence suggests yes, children born and raised in extreme cold develop slightly higher metabolic rates, more efficient fat metabolism, possibly increased brown adipose tissue which generates heat. The Saka people specifically show some genetic adaptations, variations in genes controlling fatty acid metabolism, cold tolerance, vitamin D synthesis. But these are minor advantages, not superpowers. A Saka person in a t-shirt at minus 71 degrees Celsius dies just as fast as anyone else. We're adapted, not immune. The clinic has a small reference library, and you flip through medical journals documenting cold weather injuries and conditions. There's a grimly fascinating case study of a man who fell asleep drunk outside and lost both legs below the knee, both hands, his nose, and 8 teeth. Frozen, then cracked and fell out. He survived, barely, and now lives in the village with prosthetics, a living warning about the price of carelessness. Another case describes flash freezing of corneas. Yes, your eyes can freeze if exposed long enough, causing permanent vision damage. The human body is remarkably resilient and also shockingly fragile, and at minus 71 degrees Celsius you discover exactly where those limits lie. Dr. Anastasia's final observation stays with you. The body can survive almost anything for a short time. Humans have lived through temperatures below minus 80 degrees Celsius, though not comfortably. But survival and thriving are different. Living here permanently means accepting constant minor damage. Dry skin, respiratory irritation, vitamin deficiencies, cold injuries. We manage it, treat symptoms, adapt our lives. But we're not meant for this. Every cell in our body knows we don't belong here. We survive through technology, community, and stubbornness. The cold is patient, always probing for weakness, and someday it finds everyone. You just hope that when it does, you're inside warm, surrounded by people who'll save you. Your fingers are warming now, the blood flow returning in painful prickles. The tissue will recover, probably, though Dr. Anastasia warns you'll have heightened sensitivity to cold in those spots for months, maybe years. A small price, she assures you, a minor trophy from your time at the edge of human physiological tolerance. You flex your fingers experimentally, grateful for the pain because pain means the nerves still work, means you'll keep all 10 digits. And you make a mental note. The cold here isn't just weather. It's an active agent, constantly assessing you for weakness, ready to claim whatever you leave undefended. You're sitting in a yaranga, a traditional conical tent made of reindeer hide, watching an elderly Saka man named Nikolai craft a leather harness with hands that move with the unconscious precision of someone who's performed this task 10,000 times. The tent is warm, heated by a small metal stove, and the smoke escapes through a flap at the top that Nikolai adjusts periodically with a pole, regulating temperature through pure intuition. My grandfather's grandfather knew this cold, he says in Russian heavily accented with Saka phonemes. They didn't have thermometers, fancy buildings, fuel delivered by truck. They had knowledge, animals, and respect for winter. That was enough. The Saka people, also called Yakuts, have inhabited this region for somewhere between 700 and 1,300 years, depending on which archaeological evidence you trust. Historians still argue whether they migrated from further south, pushed by other groups, or developed in situ from earlier populations. Either way, they've had centuries to develop survival technologies that predate and often surpass modern innovations. Nikolai's harness, for instance, is made from reindeer leg skin, which is naturally waterproof, more flexible in cold than cowhide, and incredibly durable. Factory harness cracks in winter, he says, becomes stiff, breaks. He flexes the leather, stays soft to -60 degrees Celsius, -70 degrees Celsius. Reindeer who lives in cold makes leather that works in cold. Simple. The logic is elegant. Use materials from organisms that have already solved the problem of surviving here. Reindeer coats provide insulation superior to most synthetic materials, with hollow guard hairs that trap air and an underlayer of dense wool. The hides, when properly treated with a mixture of animal brains and liver, the lipids create a natural weatherproofing, remain pliable in temperatures that turn cowhide brittle. Boots made from horse leg skin, removed in one piece, turned inside out and sewn, are waterproof, breathable, and so effective that modern Yakutian hunters still prefer them to commercial options. Nikolai shows you traditional clothing. A doha, a massive reindeer fur coat that reaches to the knees, with the fur turned inward against the skin. Over this goes another layer, fur turned outward, creating a double fur system with an air gap between. The hood is lined with dog fur, softer than reindeer, less likely to cause irritation around the face. Mittens are multi-layered. An inner glove of thin leather, a middle layer of fur, and an outer mitten of thick hide that can be removed for fine work. The whole ensemble weighs maybe 8 kilos and makes you look like a mobile haystack, but it keeps you alive at -71 degrees Celsius without any external heat source. The secret, Nikolai explains, is air. Dead air, trapped air. Fur traps air between skin and cold. Multiple layers trap air between layers. You don't warm yourself, you keep your own heat from escaping. Your body is the furnace. Clothing is just the insulation. It's the same principle behind modern technical clothing, just executed with materials literally harvested from the environment. The Saka didn't need material science labs. They had observation, experimentation over generations, and the ruthless filtering mechanism of natural selection. Bad designs killed their wearers, good designs propagated. Transportation technology followed similar logic. The Saka developed specific breeds of horses, small, incredibly cold-hardy, with coats that grow thick enough that they look shaggy and primitive. These horses can survive outdoors year-round, pawing through snow to reach dead grass, metabolizing roughage with remarkable efficiency. Their transportation, yes, but also mobile heat sources, companions during long winter journeys, and in extremis, emergency food. A horse can carry you 50 kilometers through -60 degrees Celsius temperatures, sharing its body heat with you during rest stops, pulling a sled loaded with supplies, all while subsisting on forage that would starve European breeds. Dogs serve similar purposes. Yakutian Lycus, a breed developed specifically for this environment, with dense double coats and an almost supernatural tolerance for cold. They hunt, pull sleds, and during rest stops or overnight camps, they're living blankets. You've seen paintings and photographs of hunters sleeping surrounded by a pile of dogs, each animal contributing body heat, creating a microclimate warm enough for survival. Press your face against a dog just to feel warmth, Nikolai says, nodding at the title phrase you mentioned. Yes, many times. Dog doesn't mind. Dog also cold, also wants warmth. You help each other. Shelter technology evolved along distinct lines. The Uranga is brilliant in its simplicity. A conical framework of poles covered with reindeer hides, with a smaller inner tent suspended inside. The air gap between inner and outer walls provides insulation, and the inner tent, heated by body warmth and a small fire, can maintain livable temperatures even when the outer wall is at ambient -70 degrees Celsius. The design is portable, you can disassemble and move it, and scalable, larger frames for larger families. When Saka people were nomadic, following reindeer herds, they carried their homes with them. Permanent settlements used balagan, log structures partially underground for earth insulation, with thick sod roofs and tiny windows. The entry was a tunnel that sloped downward, then upward, a cold trap because cold air sinks. You'd crawl through this tunnel, keeping the opening small, minimized heat loss, and emerge into a single large room where the entire family lived. Sleeping platforms were elevated because warm air rises. The hearth was central, providing heat, light, and cooking capability, with smoke management systems that seem primitive until you realize they worked perfectly for centuries. Food preservation techniques were equally sophisticated. Stroganina, the frozen fish you've been eating, is simultaneously storage method and cuisine. Fish caught in autumn are cleaned and simply frozen, remaining perfectly preserved until spring. Meat is treated similarly. Hunting in late autumn, when animals are fat for winter, provides months of frozen protein. The environment is a natural freezer operating at temperatures commercial units can't match. Berries, mushrooms, and edible plants gathered in the brief summer are also frozen, preserving vitamins through the winter darkness when fresh food is impossible. Nikolai describes ice fishing techniques that sound almost mystical. Locating fish by reading subtle variations in ice transparency, by understanding underwater currents, by interpreting signs invisible to outsiders. The ice tells you where fish rest, he says. Clear ice, dark ice, bubbles, cracks, all information. You learn to read it like book. The fishing holes are kept open through constant maintenance. Chip away forming ice every few hours, or install a wooden cover that prevents complete freezing. Some families maintain fishing holes all winter, a source of fresh food in a season where fresh is a relative term. Reindeer herding, the traditional Saka economy, is adapted to extreme cold in ways that seem counterintuitive. Reindeer are semi-domesticated. They're herded, managed, used for transport and food, but they're not confined. They roam vast territories, and the herders follow, living nomadically. In winter, reindeer dig through snow to reach lichen, their primary food source. They're perfectly adapted to the cold, with specialized noses that warm air before it reaches lungs, coats that provide insulation, and metabolisms that extract maximum nutrition from minimal food. Herders develop intimate knowledge of their animals, individual recognition of hundreds of reindeer, understanding of social hierarchies, prediction of behavior based on weather signs. This knowledge is transmitted orally, through apprenticeship, from elder to child. There's no textbook for this. You learn by doing, by watching, by making mistakes that hopefully aren't fatal. Nikolai himself herded reindeer as a young man, spending months at a time in the wilderness with only animals and occasional human contact. The loneliness was terrible sometimes, he admits, but also peaceful. Just you, animals, and the land. No complications, no politics. Cold and hunger, yes, but honest problems with honest solutions. Navigation in polar night, when darkness lasts 20 hours and snow obliterates landmarks, relies on reading the landscape through subtle signs. The way snow drifts around obstacles, creating patterns visible even in starlight. The direction tree branches grow, shaped by prevailing winds. The behavior of animals, who instinctively move toward shelter or water. The stars, brilliant and unwavering in the dry, cold air, provide directional guidance. You learn the sky like your own hand, Nikolai says. That star, that constellation, they tell you north, south, time of night, season. Sky is the map. You just read it. Weather prediction is similarly observational. Ring around the moon means storm coming, driven by ice crystals in high atmosphere. Certain cloud formations signal temperature changes. The behavior of dogs and horses, restless, seeking shelter, warns of approaching bad conditions hours before human instruments detect changes. This knowledge kept people alive when thermometers didn't exist and weather satellites were inconceivable. It still works, and many locals trust their observations over official forecasts because the lived experience of reading environmental signs has proven accurate through generations. Fire starting in extreme cold is an art form. Matches can be unreliable. The chemicals don't react properly when frozen. Lighters fail. Traditional methods used flint and steel, tinder made from specific fungus, dried, carried in waterproof containers, and shielded flame-starting locations that protected the infant fire from wind. Modern Saka people carry waterproof matches, multiple lighters, and often a small emergency fire starter kit, because fire is life and redundancy is survival. Nikolai shows you his kit: matches in a sealed tube, a ferrocerium rod, dry birch bark, which burns even when frozen, and a small magnifying glass, useless in winter darkness but included from habit. The concept of enough is different here. Enough firewood isn't what gets you through tonight. It's what gets you through until you can harvest more, which might be weeks. Enough food isn't a meal. It's reserves for an entire season. Enough clothing isn't what's comfortable. It's what keeps you alive in worst-case scenarios. The mindset is fundamentally conservative, planning for catastrophe because catastrophe is not an if but a when. Nikolai tells stories of families who ran short on supplies, firewood, food, fuel, and died in their homes, simply freezing or starving because they underestimated the winter's duration or severity. But there's also beauty in the traditional knowledge system, a deep ecological understanding that sees humans as part of the landscape, not separate from it. Respect for animals killed for food, ceremonies of gratitude for successful hunts, careful management of resources to ensure sustainability. You don't take more than you need, Nikolai says. The land provides, but the land is not infinite. Our people understood this before scientists had words for it. Take too much, the animals leave, the land becomes poor, and you starve. Take appropriately, show respect, and there's always enough. Some of this knowledge is being lost. Younger generations learn Russian in school, move to cities for opportunity, adopt modern technologies that work well enough to make traditional skills seem quaint rather than essential. Nikolai worries about this. When I die, who knows how to read ice for fishing? Who makes proper leather? Who predicts weather by watching dogs? He's teaching his grandchildren when they visit, but they're more interested in their phones when signal permits than in skinning reindeer. It's a tension visible everywhere. The pull between tradition that works and modernity that's easier. Yet the core wisdom remains relevant. The principles: use materials suited to the environment, maintain redundancy, read natural signs, respect resource limits, build community interdependence. These translate across technological levels. Modern Oymyakon residents still follow these principles, just with updated tools. The ancestral knowledge of the Saka people isn't museum piece history. It's living practice, adapted and evolving, proving that some survival wisdom is truly timeless. You're standing in a barn at 4 a.m., in complete darkness except for your headlamp, watching your breath crystallize and fall like glitter while a Yakutian horse exhales fog directly into your face. The animal is massive and shaggy, looking more like a prehistoric creature than modern livestock, and the warmth radiating from its body is palpable even through your layers. Mikhail nudges you forward. Go ahead, he says. You won't understand until you do it. So you step closer, press your face against the horse's thick winter coat, and for the first time in days you feel genuinely warm. The animal's body heat penetrates your frozen cheeks, and you understand viscerally what he means. These animals aren't just livestock or transportation. They're biological furnaces, mobile heat sources, and in the most desperate circumstances, the difference between life and death. Yakutian horses are evolutionary marvels, a breed that's been naturally selected for cold tolerance over thousands of years. Their winter coat grows to 10 centimeters thick, a dense layer of hollow guard hairs over soft underlayer wool, creating insulation so effective that snow landing on their backs doesn't melt. Their body heat isn't escaping. Their metabolic rate in winter increases dramatically, burning fat reserves to generate warmth, and they can survive on minimal forage that would starve horses from temperate climates. Their legs are shorter and stockier than European breeds, reducing surface area and heat loss. Even their circulatory system is adapted. Specialized blood vessels in their legs operate as countercurrent heat exchangers, warming cold blood returning from the extremities before it reaches the core. But the most remarkable adaptation is behavioral and relational. These horses tolerate, even seem to welcome, close physical contact with humans. On winter journeys, riders and horses huddle together during rest stops, the human literally pressed against the animal's flank or belly, sharing warmth in a symbiotic arrangement that benefits both. The horse gets protection from wind, perhaps additional food or water provided by the human, and the human gets access to a living heater producing thousands of watts of thermal energy. Historical accounts describe travelers surviving blizzards by lying pressed against horses for hours or even days, the animal's bulk and warmth creating a survivable microclimate. You spend the morning helping Mikhail tend to his horses, and the routine reveals how central these animals are to winter survival. Each horse consumes roughly 20 kilograms of hay per day in winter, plus supplemental grains and fish oil for fat content. The caloric intake is staggering but necessary. They're burning it all to maintain body temperature and muscle mass. The barn, remember, isn't heated. It's merely windproof. The horses themselves provide the warmth, their combined body heat raising the interior temperature to maybe minus 25 degrees Celsius, which is downright tropical compared to outside's minus 67 degrees Celsius. Mikhail demonstrates proper cold weather horse care, checking hooves for ice buildup, which can cause lameness, examining ears and muzzles for frostbite, rare, but possible in extreme wind, ensuring water access, a heated trough, because horses need to drink even in winter. The horses are calm, accustomed to handling, and when you lean against one for warmth, it shifts slightly to provide better contact, almost as if it understands the exchange. Maybe it does. These animals have been partners with humans in this environment for long enough that mutual dependence is instinctual. Dogs are equally critical, perhaps more so for their versatility. The Yakutian Laika, a breed distinct from other Laikas, adapted specifically to this region, is a medium-sized dog with a thick double coat, pointed ears, and a curled tail that it uses as a face warmer when sleeping. These dogs can sleep comfortably in minus 50 degrees Celsius, curled into tight balls with their noses tucked under their tails, their breathing warming a small chamber of air around their faces. A team of dogs can pull a sled carrying 200 kilograms across frozen terrain, navigating by scent and instinct through conditions where human vision is useless. But their thermal contribution is at least as valuable as their labor. You're introduced to a musher named Ivan who runs a small sled dog operation for tourists in summer and freight in winter. His kennel houses 20 dogs, and their combined sleeping area, a sheltered but unheated structure, maintains itself at around minus 15 degrees Celsius purely from canine body heat. The dogs sleep in piles, layered together like living insulation, each animal contributing and receiving warmth. In really bad cold, below minus 70 degrees Celsius, Ivan says, "I bring them inside the house, 20 dogs in one room all night." Sounds crazy, yes, but the warmth they produce heats the room better than a stove and uses no fuel. He demonstrates a winter camping technique. You sleep in a sleeping bag, but you surround yourself with dogs. 4 or 5 dogs pressed against your bag. On top, around the sides, create an insulated pod that maintains survivable temperatures even in a tent with minimal heating. The dogs want this too, Ivan explains. They're warm animals, but even they benefit from shared heat. This cooperation, you provide shelter and food, they provide warmth and work. Everyone survives. The dog's other role is navigational. In complete darkness or whiteout conditions, dogs navigate by scent, by air currents, by senses humans don't fully understand. They can follow a trail days old, buried under fresh snow, finding their way back to camp when a human would be hopelessly lost. They sense thin ice, unstable snow, approaching storms. A good lead dog, Ivan says with genuine affection, is worth more than any GPS device. Technology fails in cold. Batteries die, screens freeze, satellites lose signal. Dog never fails. Dog always finds home. You experience this firsthand on a short sled journey to a neighboring settlement, roughly 10 kilometers away. It's mid-morning but still dark, temperature hovering at minus 65 degrees Celsius, and Ivan hitches 6 dogs to a traditional sled while you bundle into so many layers you can barely move. The dogs are excited, barking and lunging, their breath creating a fog bank around the team. Ivan gives a command in Saka, and they surge forward, the sled jerking into motion with surprising speed. The sensation is surreal, gliding across snow that squeaks and crunches under the sled runners, stars brilliant overhead. The only sounds the dogs panting and the rush of frozen air. You're riding maybe half a meter behind 6 living creatures whose body heat is visible as vapor trails in your headlamp beam. Every 10 minutes, Ivan stops the team briefly, and the dogs immediately huddle together, sharing warmth during the rest. You're invited to approach, to kneel among them, and the collective heat from 6 dogs is remarkable. You can remove your outer mittens for 30 seconds to adjust equipment, something that would cause frostbite in seconds otherwise. Halfway through the journey, one of Ivan's dogs, a veteran named Grom, slows and starts limping. Ivan stops immediately, examines the paw, finds ice packed between the pads. He removes it carefully, applies a salve, and makes a decision. Grom rides in the sled basket while another dog takes his place in harness. The injured dog curls up at your feet, and you feel its warmth through your boots, a mobile heating pad that makes the remainder of the journey considerably more comfortable. This is the relationship. Care flows both ways, human and animal adapting to each other's needs. Reindeer, while less common in Oymyakon proper, they prefer more open terrain, serve similar functions in herding communities. A reindeer's coat is so effective that they can lie down in snow and create a melted depression purely from body heat. Herders historically slept against their reindeer on winter nights, and the practice continues in remote areas. The animals tolerate this, perhaps even benefit from it. The human provides wind protection and potentially scares off predators, and the reindeer provides warmth. Cattle exist here too, another adapted breed, Yakutian cows, smaller and shaggier than European breeds, with the same hollow hair insulation system. A barn full of cows produces remarkable heat. 10 cows in an insulated but unheated space can raise the temperature 40 degrees above ambient through their combined metabolic output. Farmers historically used this, build sleeping quarters above the barn, and the rising heat from the animals below keeps the human space marginally livable. The smell is terrible, and the humidity from animal respiration causes ice buildup that must be chipped away regularly. But you're warm and alive. There's a darker side to this dependence. Animals die in extreme cold too. A horse caught in a blizzard without shelter can freeze, its metabolic furnace overwhelmed by wind and temperature. Dogs left outside during the worst cold can develop frostbite on their paws and ears. Cattle in barns that aren't windproof enough succumb to cold stress. And when animals die, their owner's survival becomes significantly more precarious. You're shown a small graveyard of sorts, bones of horses and dogs who didn't survive various winters, a reminder that even adapted animals have limits. But the relationship between humans and animals here transcends utility. There's genuine affection. Mikhail speaks to his horses with warmth. Ivan knows each dog's personality and preferences. Families name their cattle and mourn them when they die. This isn't just livestock management. It's partnership. Historians still argue whether this represents true mutualism or simply pragmatic dependence, but from the inside it feels like the former. These animals chose, in some evolutionary sense, to cast their lot with humans in this extreme environment, and humans chose to keep them alive, and together they've created a survival system that works. You're back in Mikhail's house now, and the family dog, a Laika named Belka, follows you to your sleeping area and curls up against your bed without invitation. Mikhail notices and smiles. She knows you're cold, he says. Dogs always know. She'll stay there all night, keep you warm. In morning, maybe you give her extra food. Yes, it's transactional, but also more than that. The dog is warm too, benefiting from indoor heat, and your presence provides security and company. It's a fair exchange, repeated millions of times across thousands of years. Heat for protection, warmth for companionship, survival through cooperation. As you drift towards sleep, you're acutely aware of Belka's warmth against your legs. A living radiator that requires no fuel, no electricity, just food and care. You think about the title phrase, pressing your face against a dog just to feel warmth, and realize it's not metaphorical or desperate. It's practical, routine, and profound. In a place where technology fails and systems break down, where the cold is an omnipresent threat, animals remain the most reliable source of warmth available. They're partners, companions, and saviors, and you finally understand why every successful human culture in extreme cold has been fundamentally intertwined with animal husbandry. Not because it's efficient or economically optimal, but because it works, has always worked, and likely will continue working long after more complex systems have frozen and failed. You're standing in what Mikhail calls the food cellar, though calling it a cellar is generous. It's essentially a hole in the permafrost, 8 meters deep, accessed by a ladder that's slick with ice. The temperature down here is a stable minus 12 degrees Celsius year-round, making it warmer than the outside air in winter and colder than outside in summer. It's nature's freezer, reliable and free, and the walls are lined with shelves holding frozen fish, meat, berries, and containers of preserved foods that look like they've been here since the Soviet era. Some probably have. This, Mikhail says, gesturing around the frozen chamber, is how we survive. The land gives, we take, we store. When winter is long or summer hunting is poor, we have this. The economics of food in Oymyakon are brutal and fascinating in equal measure. Fresh vegetables are almost mythological. They arrive maybe twice per year on supply trucks, cost absurd amounts, and are treated like luxuries rather than staples. A single tomato in January might cost $3, assuming any are available. Potatoes and onions are more common, stored in massive quantities in autumn and kept in permafrost cellars where they freeze solid but remain edible when thawed and cooked. You learn quickly that fresh is a relative term. Fresh meat is anything killed within the last 6 months. Fresh fish is whatever you pulled through the ice this week. Stroganina, that frozen fish you've been eating, represents both necessity and cuisine elevated to art form. The fish, typically whitefish, broad whitefish, or Arctic cisco, are caught in autumn when they're fattiest, cleaned, and frozen immediately. The cold preserves them perfectly, no bacterial growth at minus 60 degrees Celsius, and they're stored outside, stacked like cordwood. To prepare stroganina, you take a frozen fish, and we're talking frozen solid, like a fish-shaped piece of wood, prop it upright, and using a sharp knife, shave off thin strips. These are eaten immediately with salt, sometimes with a sauce made from fermented fish or wild garlic from the previous summer. The texture is strange, crunchy with ice crystals, but the flavor is intensely pure, somehow cleaner than thawed fish. It's also incredibly efficient. No cooking required, which saves fuel, no thawing required, which saves time, and the freezing process has essentially preserved the fish in perfect condition. Some families have stroganina from fish caught months ago that tastes as fresh as anything you'd get at a coastal market. The technique works with meat too, sliced frozen horse meat, reindeer or beef, eaten raw and half-frozen, providing protein and fat without fuel expenditure. But here's the thing about food supply in Oymyakon that really drives home the isolation. Bulk deliveries happen twice per year in winter when the rivers are frozen solid and become roads. Yes, roads. The region has few permanent roads. Maintaining asphalt or concrete in these temperatures is nearly impossible, as thermal expansion and contraction tear pavement apart. Instead, during winter, when river ice reaches 2 meters thick or more, massive supply trucks drive directly on the ice, creating what are called zimniki, or winter roads. You witness one of these supply runs from a distance, and it's simultaneously impressive and terrifying. 18-wheelers loaded with fuel, dry goods, building materials, and food, driving across a frozen river at 30 kilometers per hour. The ice groans audibly under the weight, but it holds. These convoys travel thousands of kilometers from Yakutsk, the regional capital, taking weeks to reach the most remote settlements. They bring a year's worth of supplies: flour, sugar, salt, fuel oil, gasoline, ammunition, medicine, and luxury items like coffee, tea, and candy. The economics are punishing. Transport costs multiply the price of everything. Mikhail shows you receipts. A 50-kilo bag of flour that costs maybe 800 rubles in Yakutsk costs 2,500 rubles here. Fuel oil is even worse. Essential for heating and generators, each liter costs 3 or 4 times the price in temperate Russia. For families living on modest incomes, pensions, subsistence hunting, occasional work, the cost of basic survival is staggering. Many families spend 60 to 70% of their income just on heating fuel and staple foods. This economic reality drives continued reliance on traditional food sources. Hunting and fishing aren't recreational activities here. They're survival strategies. Mikhail estimates his family gets perhaps 40% of their calories from hunted or fished protein, moose, reindeer, hare, fish. These aren't purchased. They're harvested, representing free food if you discount the time, ammunition, and fuel for snowmobiles. A moose killed in autumn provides hundreds of kilos of meat, frozen and stored in the permafrost cellar, supplementing purchased food through the entire winter. Fishing continues year-round but intensifies in autumn and winter. You accompany a fishing expedition to a nearby lake, where families have maintained ice holes since first freeze. The holes are roughly 1 meter in diameter, covered with wooden lids and insulated with snow to slow refreezing. Every day, someone must chip away new ice formation. Even with lids, the holes want to freeze solid. The fishing technique is beautifully simple. A line with a hook baited with smaller fish or fish entrails, lowered into the dark water below. The fish down there, broad whitefish, cisco, burbot, are sluggish in the cold, and catching them requires patience and a feel for subtle tugs on the line. When you pull up a fish, it freezes solid within minutes on the ice surface, and you toss it onto the sled for transport home. A good day's fishing yields 10 or 15 fish, each maybe half a kilo, providing protein for weeks. The fish are already frozen for storage. Nature has done the preservation work for you. It's an elegant system, requiring minimal technology. A drill or ice chipper, a line, hooks, and patience. Preserved foods represent another category entirely. Berries collected during the brief summer and frozen immediately, mushrooms dried and stored, wild plants like sorrel and wild garlic preserved in brine or frozen. These provide vitamins largely absent from the winter diet, and families guard their secret berry patches jealously. You're shown a jar of cloudberries, golden, tart fruits that grow in boggy areas, frozen in their own juice, a source of vitamin C that prevents scurvy. Scurvy was historically a real problem in extreme northern populations until they developed preservation techniques and learned which traditional foods, like raw fish and organ meats, provided necessary vitamins. The village store, which you visit during one of its 3-day weekly opening periods, is a study in scarcity and adaptation. The shelves hold mostly dry goods and canned items. Pasta, rice, canned meat, condensed milk, tea, sugar. The fresh food section consists of a single freezer case, turned off, because why cool food when the store itself is minus 15 degrees Celsius, holding imported frozen vegetables and occasional frozen chicken from industrial producers thousands of kilometers away. The vegetables are icy bricks. The chicken is dubious quality. Both are expensive. But the store also stocks ammunition, boxes of rifle cartridges for hunting, and fishing supplies, fuel additives for vehicles, and bulk candles for when power fails. These aren't sporting goods. They're survival equipment, and they're often cheaper than food because the regional government subsidizes them, recognizing that subsistence hunting and fishing are essential to population survival. You can buy a box of ammunition cheaper than a kilo of fresh apples, which aren't available anyway. The social economics of food are equally interesting. Sharing is mandatory, not optional. When a family kills a moose, the meat is distributed throughout the village, partly out of tradition, partly out of practicality. You can't eat an entire moose before it becomes freezer burned even in natural cold storage, and partly out of insurance. You share your surplus because next time, someone else will have surplus and they'll share with you. It's a distributed risk management system that predates any insurance company, and it works. Mikhail explains the calculus. If I kill moose and keep all, I have meat for maybe 6 months, but if I get injured, cannot hunt, my family starves. If I share when I have extra, everyone shares with me when I have nothing. The village survives together or dies separately. It's not altruism, it's enlightened self-interest, but the result is a food distribution system that ensures no family goes hungry, even when individual hunting luck varies. Fuel for heating is perhaps more critical than food. You can survive weeks without food, but only hours without heat. Firewood is the primary heating fuel, harvested from forests in summer when trees can be cut and transported. Families with trucks or access to horses bring in enormous quantities, 10, 15 cubic meters or more, stacking it near the house for winter use. Coal and fuel oil supplement wood, but they're expensive and supply dependent. Running out of heating fuel in January is a life-threatening emergency. You help Mikhail process firewood, a never-ending task. Splitting frozen logs, which shatter rather than split, requiring technique. Stacking it close to the house, but not touching, to prevent moisture transfer. And bringing in daily supplies. The household burns through perhaps 50 kilos of wood per day in deep winter. More when temperatures drop below -65 degrees Celsius. It's a staggering amount, representing hours of labor in cutting, transporting, splitting, and burning. Fuel is quite literally life, and the economy of Oymyakon revolves around acquiring and managing it. There's a dark edge to all this. Poverty here isn't an inconvenience. It's potentially fatal. Families who can't afford adequate fuel, who lack hunting equipment or fishing supplies, who don't have transportation to access resources, they're at genuine risk. The regional government provides some subsidies, pension payments, and occasional emergency relief, but the safety net is thin. Stories circulate about elderly residents found frozen in homes where the fuel ran out, about families who starved when hunting failed and they couldn't afford store food. Yet there's also resilience and ingenuity. People making fuel from waste oil, building super-insulated greenhouses, heated by composting manure, to grow minimal vegetables in summer, creating cooperative buying groups to reduce transport costs. The economy here is scrappy, improvised, and ruthlessly practical. Nothing is wasted. Animal bones are boiled for broth, then ground for dog food. Fish guts become bait or fertilizer. Worn clothing is repurposed as insulation. As you stand in the permafrost cellar, looking at shelves of frozen provisions representing months of labor and thousands of rubles in purchased goods, you understand. This isn't a pantry. It's a survival cache, a buffer against catastrophe. The food and fuel economy of Oymyakon operates on razor-thin margins where miscalculation or bad luck can spiral into disaster. But people have made it work for generations through sharing, planning, traditional harvesting, and acceptance that comfort is optional but survival is not. The frozen fish stacked around you aren't quaint. They're the difference between life and death stretched across the longest winter you can imagine. You're awakened at 3 a.m. by silence. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet night, but the ominous silence of machinery that should be running but isn't. The van outside, which has been running continuously for 6 days, has stopped. You hear Mikhail moving immediately, cursing in Saka and Russian, pulling on clothes in the darkness. Within 30 seconds he's outside, and you follow, stepping into -68 degrees Celsius darkness to find him staring at the van with the expression of someone whose worst fear has just materialized. Fuel line froze, he says flatly, or fuel pump failed, or something. The or something carries the weight of 100 possible catastrophes, any of which could leave his family without transportation until spring. This is what system failure looks like at -71 degrees Celsius. Sudden, potentially catastrophic, and frighteningly common. The van represented mobility, emergency evacuation capability, a way to reach the clinic or escape danger. Now it's an inert metal sculpture, useless until temperatures rise or someone performs repairs that may be impossible in this cold. Mikhail makes a decision quickly. Drain the oil while it's still barely liquid. Remove the battery. Bring both inside to warm. Maybe in a few hours, with preheating, he can restart it. Maybe. The uncertainty hangs in the frozen air like a death sentence. You spend the rest of the night learning about cascading failures, how one problem spirals into many in an environment this unforgiving. The van failure means the truck, still running, must stay running no matter what, even if it needs repairs, even if fuel consumption is wasteful. It means any trip requiring a vehicle must be carefully rationed. It means if someone gets injured or sick, evacuation becomes complicated. One vehicle failure has suddenly made the family significantly more vulnerable, and everyone knows it. Power outages are common and terrifying. The village power system, a diesel generator supplemented by individual home generators, runs on fuel delivered twice yearly. When it fails, which happens regularly during extreme cold, fuel gelling, mechanical stress, simple breakdown, homes lose electric heat, lights, and the ability to pump water if they have electric systems. Mikhail's house has backup systems: the wood stove, kerosene lamps, manual water hauling, But families without redundancy face immediate crisis. You're visiting a neighbor when their generator fails mid-morning. The temperature inside the house begins dropping immediately. Without the electric heater supplementing the wood stove, the interior temperature plummets from 15 degrees Celsius to 10 degrees Celsius in an hour, heading toward 0 degrees Celsius. The family springs into action. Stoke the wood stove to maximum. Burn through a day's worth of wood in hours. Close off rooms to concentrate heat in one space. Pile on extra clothing. It's controlled panic, a race to stabilize temperature before the house becomes uninhabitable. The father, Sergei, works on the generator in the attached airlock, trying to diagnose the problem while his fingers go numb. It's the fuel line, frozen despite additives, and fixing it requires warming the entire fuel system, which requires heat he doesn't have. He makes an agonizing decision. Bleed fuel from the line, bring it inside to warm, reinstall, try again. This wastes precious fuel, but without the generator functioning, they'll burn through all their firewood in days and then face a choice between freezing or burning their furniture. After 3 hours of work, blue-lipped and shivering, Sergei gets the generator restarted. The house begins warming, crisis averted, but the family has burned through 3 days' worth of firewood and a chunk of their fuel reserves. They're now more vulnerable for the rest of winter, their safety margin reduced. This is how people die here. Not in dramatic events, but through accumulating setbacks that erode reserves until nothing is left. Water system failures are equally serious. The pipes in Mikhail's house froze overnight despite the heating tape wrapped around them. Now the backup water, stored in large containers, must be rationed carefully because bringing in ice blocks and melting them is fuel-intensive and time-consuming. Washing becomes minimal. Cooking uses recycled water. Everyone drinks less to avoid depleting reserves. It's a temporary problem, but if the pipes don't thaw when temperature's moderate, assuming they do, it becomes a permanent winter condition requiring total reliance on melted ice. You witness a medical emergency that illustrates the stakes. A child in a neighboring house develops a high fever, possibly pneumonia. The clinic has basic antibiotics, but the doctor isn't in residence. She's in Yakutsk, won't return for a week. The child needs evacuation to the regional hospital, a 12-hour drive in good conditions. But there's a storm coming, visibility is near zero, and temperature is minus 70 degrees Celsius. Attempting the drive could kill everyone in the vehicle if they break down or get stuck. Not attempting it could kill the child. The village convenes an informal council. Mikhail, Sergei, Ivan the musher, several other men with vehicles and winter driving experience. They assess. Roads are passable currently. Storm won't arrive for 6 hours. Child's condition is serious but not immediately critical. Decision. Attempt evacuation with 2 vehicles traveling together. Enough supplies for 3 days if they get stranded. Satellite phone for emergency contact. This calculated risk, the kind people here make regularly, balancing danger against danger. You watch them prepare. Both trucks loaded with emergency supplies, extra fuel, food, sleeping bags rated to minus 50 degrees Celsius. Inadequate, but all that's available: shovels, tow straps, flares. The child is bundled in so many layers she's nearly immobile and placed in the cabin with her mother and an attendant. The convoy departs, red taillights disappearing into darkness, and everyone left behind waits anxiously. 12 hours to reach the hospital, if everything goes perfectly. Radio silence is normal, coverage is spotty. But silence could also mean disaster. 18 hours later, word comes via satellite phone. They made it. The child is hospitalized, responding to treatment. The drivers are resting, will return when weather clears. Relief floods the village, but it's tempered by awareness. They got lucky. Historians still argue whether human habitation here represents triumph over nature or a perpetual hostage situation where nature occasionally grants parole. The people themselves don't philosophize, they just keep making these impossible calculations. You learn about vehicle recovery stories, trucks broken down in minus 65 degrees Celsius temperatures, 50 kilometers from anywhere, and the desperate measures to survive. One man describes spending 36 hours in his truck cab, engine dead, burning spare tire rubber in a metal bucket for heat, melting snow for water, using floor mats as extra insulation. He survived because he had supplies, food, extra clothing, a way to make fire, and because he told people his route so search parties knew where to look. The rescuers found him hypothermic but alive, his truck a blackened shell from the toxic smoke of burning synthetic materials. Another family got stranded when their vehicle broke through thin ice on a river crossing. The ice was thick enough for empty trucks but not their loaded one. They escaped the sinking vehicle with minutes to spare, huddled on the ice, and had to make a choice. Stay with the visible wreck and hope rescue comes before they freeze, or attempt walking to the nearest settlement, 8 kilometers away. They chose to walk, and it saved them barely. All 3 suffered frostbite, 1 lost toes, but they survived because they moved, generated heat, and reached help before hypothermia shut them down. Fire is a paradoxical danger. You need it desperately, but it can destroy everything. A house fire in winter is catastrophic. Not only do you lose shelter, but you lose it when outside temperature is minus 70 degrees Celsius and survival without shelter is measured in minutes. You visit a burned-out house, a blackened skeleton of charred wood, and hear the story. A wood stove overheated, ignited creosote buildup in the chimney. Fire spread through the dried wood structure. The family escaped with their lives and nothing else. No time to grab clothing, supplies, valuables. They were in night clothes in minus 65 degrees Celsius. The community response was immediate. Neighboring families took them in, provided clothing, food, shelter. But the family lost everything: their survival cash, their home, a lifetime of accumulated supplies and equipment. They'll likely have to relocate, cannot rebuild until spring, and even then face enormous costs. The government provides some disaster relief, but it's inadequate. Insurance is rare. Premiums in this environment are prohibitive. This family's margin of survival just became razor thin, and everyone knows how easily it could happen to them. Fuel depot fires are community-level catastrophes. You hear stories about a settlement where the central fuel storage caught fire. Lightning strike, static discharge, nobody knows for sure. The explosion was visible for kilometers, and the fire burned for days, consuming heating oil and diesel for the entire village. By the time it was controlled, winter fuel reserves were gone. The government had to emergency airlift fuel, enormously expensive, and ration it strictly. Families got enough to prevent freezing, but not enough for comfort. That winter, interior temperatures in homes averaged 8 degrees Celsius, barely above freezing, and several elderly residents died from cold-related complications. Mental health crises are another form of system failure, the psychological infrastructure that keeps people functional breaking down under accumulated stress. The darkness, isolation, constant cold, and economic pressure create conditions where depression, anxiety, and substance abuse flourish. You meet a man struggling with alcoholism, a common problem, and he's brutally honest. The cold, the dark, the same frozen faces every day for months. Sometimes you need to not feel it. Vodka makes it warmer, lighter, easier, until it doesn't, and then you're just frozen inside too. The village has lost people to suicide, to alcohol-related deaths. Passing out drunk outside is a death sentence. To despair-driven poor decisions that snowballed into catastrophe. There's minimal mental health support. The regional psychologist visits quarterly if roads permit, and phone counseling requires internet connectivity that's unreliable. Traditional support systems, family, community, spiritual practices, help but aren't always enough against the grinding pressure of winter darkness and isolation. When multiple systems fail simultaneously, power out, vehicle broken, illness in the family, fuel running low, it creates a spiral where survival becomes a minute-by-minute struggle. You see a family in this situation. Their generator failed, truck won't start, grandmother is diabetic and needs insulin, stored in the unheated entry room, barely cold enough to preserve it. And they're down to their last week of firewood with 6 weeks of winter remaining. They're not panicking, but the stress is palpable. Every decision matters, every resource is rationed, every moment carries the weight of potential disaster. The village comes through for them, shared firewood, temporary generator loan, help attempting vehicle repairs, but it's a reminder that individual resilience has limits. When your systems fail at -71 degrees Celsius, community becomes life support. Without it, you simply die, slowly or quickly depending on which system failed and how completely. This is Oymykon's darkest lesson. The margin between survival and death is thinner than you ever imagined, measured in fuel remaining, temperature degrees, hours until rescue, or the collective goodwill of neighbors who could just as easily hoard resources for themselves. As you return to Mikhail's house, grateful for its functioning systems, you understand viscerally what people here face. Living perpetually on the edge of catastrophe, where any failure, mechanical, medical, social, or environmental, can cascade into disaster. The resilience you've admired isn't heroic. It's the baseline requirement for existence. And sometimes, despite everything, despite preparation and community and determination, the systems fail catastrophically and people die. Not because they were careless or unprepared, but because they were human, living in a place that forgives no mistakes. You're standing outside in the weak afternoon sunlight, and yes, it's actually sunlight now, a pale disk that's been climbing higher each day as winter slowly loosens its grip. The temperature is a relatively balmy -52 degrees Celsius, warm enough that you can spend 10 minutes outside without mortal danger, and people are actually smiling, moving less frantically, taking time to chat in the streets. Spring is still months away, but the worst is past, and there's a palpable sense of relief in the village. Mikhail notices your confusion. Why would anyone choose to stay here, to endure this year after year? And he laughs. You think we're crazy, yes? Maybe we are. But this is home. Let me show you why. He takes you to the edge of the village where the land opens up, and in the growing light you see it properly for the first time. Vast taiga forest stretching to the horizon, mountains in the distance catching the pink light of dawn, and overhead a sky that's beginning to show the faintest hint of the aurora borealis, green curtains shimmering like something from a dream. This, Mikhail says quietly, you don't get this anywhere else. This is ours. The pride is unmistakable, and you're beginning to understand it. These people aren't here because they're trapped or ignorant of alternatives. Many have traveled, lived in cities, experienced what the rest of the world considers normal. They're here by choice, because Oymyakon offers something that temperate comfort cannot. A life lived intensely, where every day requires engagement, where community isn't optional, where the land itself is both adversary and home in ways that create deep, complicated attachment. Valentina, the museum curator you met earlier, explains it over tea that's actually warm enough to drink without burning your tongue, a luxury after weeks of scalding hot beverages consumed quickly before they freeze. My children ask me to move to Yakutsk, to Moscow even. They have apartments, heating that works with a switch, food delivered to the door. They don't understand why I stay. She pauses, considering. But in cities, I am nobody, just another old woman. Here, I am Valentina who remembers the old ways, who teaches children their heritage, who keeps the museum. I matter. The cold is hard, yes, but being unnecessary is harder. This sense of purpose, of being essential to the community's functioning, permeates the settlement. Everyone has roles. Mikhail maintains vehicles and helps neighbors with repairs. Ivan provides transportation and tracking expertise. Dr. Anastasia delivers medical care. The school teachers ensure the next generation survives and thrives. There's no hiding in anonymity, no opting out of community participation. Your survival depends on others, and theirs depends on you, creating bonds that feel increasingly rare in the modern world. The children, surprisingly, don't all flee at the first opportunity. You speak with Sina, Mikhail's daughter, who's been learning English in school and is eager to practice. Do I want to leave? She considers. Maybe for university to see other places, but I think I come back. This is where my family is, where I know how to live. Cities are soft. Everything is easy, so nothing matters. Here, things matter. It's a sentiment echoed by younger adults who've returned after years away. A woman named Katya, who studied in St. Petersburg and worked in Moscow for 5 years, moved back 3 years ago. I had money there, a good job, restaurants and theaters and everything. But I was lonely all the time, surrounded by millions of people who didn't care if I lived or died. Here, if I don't show up somewhere, people notice. They check on me. When I was sick last year, 7 families brought food. That doesn't happen in Moscow. The physical beauty of the place, once you can actually see it without your eyeballs freezing, is undeniable. The taiga in winter has a stark grandeur. Trees laden with frost creating sculptures of white against blue sky, the quality of light at these latitudes producing colors that seem impossible, and when the aurora appears, the darkness transforms into a celestial theater showing displays you could never imagine. Summer, you're told, is even more dramatic. The sun never fully sets, temperatures reach 20 degrees Celsius or even 30 degrees Celsius, flowers explode into bloom within days, and the land becomes almost unrecognizably lush. There's also pride in extremity itself, in living at the edge of human capability. Oymyakon's designation as the coldest inhabited place on Earth isn't a source of embarrassment. It's an identity, a claim to uniqueness that residents embrace. The Pole of Cold monument in the village center, a tripod structure marking the achievement, is a gathering point and a symbol. We're famous for this, Sergei tells you with obvious satisfaction. People around the world know about Oymyakon. We're special. This pride extends to cultural preservation. The Saka language, traditions, and practices that are fading in more developed areas remain vibrant here, partly because they're still functionally useful. You can't abandon traditional cold-weather survival techniques when you might need them tomorrow. Young people learning to make traditional clothing, to fish through ice, to read weather signs aren't engaging in historical reenactment. They're acquiring life skills. The culture is living, not museumified, and there's satisfaction in that continuity. The economic situation, while difficult, also creates a kind of equality. Everyone is struggling more or less together. There are no billionaires in Oymyakon, no visible wealth gaps that create resentment. The shopkeeper, the teacher, the pensioner, the hunter, all are working hard to survive, all have skills the community needs. Historians still argue whether this represents genuine egalitarianism or simply shared poverty. But the social cohesion it creates is real. Envy is less corrosive when everyone is cold and everyone is getting by on similar margins. There's also a contrarian streak, a stubbornness that finds expression in staying when logic suggests leaving. Nikolai, the elder craftsman, puts it bluntly. The world says humans cannot live here. We say, watch us. It's proof we're stronger than nature thinks, tougher than temperature allows. Every winter we survive is a victory. It's humanity's defiant middle finger to planetary conditions, and there's something appealing about that attitude, especially to people who value self-sufficiency and resilience. The darkness itself, while challenging, creates social structures that might not exist otherwise. When there's no external entertainment, no ability to just go outside and walk around, people gather. Mikhail's house sees visitors almost every evening. Neighbors dropping by for tea, conversation, companionship. The community center hosts events, traditional music performances, storytelling evenings, movie nights with films downloaded months ago. The isolation forces connection in ways that urban abundance prevents. And then there's adaptation, the satisfaction of mastering an environment that's actively hostile. You've learned more about cold weather survival in 2 weeks here than in a lifetime of reading. You can now recognize the signs of frostbite, maintain a wood stove efficiently, dress in layers properly, move through minus 60 degrees Celsius without panic. These aren't trivial skills. They're hard-won knowledge, and there's pride in acquisition. The residents here are all experts in extreme survival, and expertise breeds confidence. The land provides, too, in ways you've come to appreciate. The hunting and fishing aren't just economic necessities. Their connection to place, seasonal rhythms, and traditions stretching back centuries. When Ivan successfully tracks and kills a moose, it's not just meat. It's accomplishment, provision for family and community, participation in cycles that predate cities and nations. There's meaning in that participation that supermarket shopping can never provide. Children growing up here develop a toughness and competence that's increasingly rare. 8-year-olds navigate outdoor survival protocols that would challenge adults elsewhere. Teenagers can maintain vehicles, process game, manage thermal emergencies. They're not coddled or shielded from harsh realities. They're prepared for them, trusted with real responsibilities because those responsibilities are genuine necessities. The result is young people who are strikingly capable and confident. But perhaps the deepest reason people stay is simply that it's home, in all the irrational, emotional weight that word carries. Mikhail walks you through the village, pointing out landmarks. The house where he was born, the lake where he learned to fish, the spot where he proposed to his wife 30 years ago. Could I live easier somewhere else? Of course, he says. Could I be warmer, have more money, work less hard? Yes, yes, yes. But I wouldn't be me anymore. This place made me. The cold, the community, the land, it's all part of who I am. Leaving would be leaving myself. Valentina speaks of her grandmother's stories, passed down through generations, all rooted in this specific landscape. The winter campsites, the summer pastures, the fishing holes, the hunting grounds. They're not just geography. They're narrative, identity, continuity. To leave would be to sever connection with ancestors, with story, with the deep time that gives life meaning beyond immediate comfort. As your time in Oymyakon draws to a close, you find yourself unexpectedly reluctant to leave. The cold that seemed unbearable 2 weeks ago feels manageable now, almost familiar. The darkness no longer oppresses. You've learned to navigate by starlight, to appreciate the subtle variations in twilight. The community that seemed strange now feels like friends. You understand, finally, that humans don't just adapt to places. We learn to love them, even when they're actively trying to kill us. On your last evening, there's a gathering at the community center, not in your honor specifically, but you're included, welcomed. There's food, stroganina, naturally, and horse meat stew. Local berry wine that's surprisingly good, and music. Someone playing an accordion, traditional soca songs mixing with Russian folk melodies. People are laughing, children running around, the normal texture of human social life, just wrapped in more layers and happening at minus 55 degrees Celsius. Mikhail raises a glass. To surviving another winter, to our home, to stubborn people who live where we're not supposed to. Everyone drinks, and you drink too, understanding now that it's not insanity or ignorance that keeps people here. It's choice, complicated, multifaceted, deeply human choice that values community, identity, pride, and belonging over comfort and ease. Oymyakon isn't a place people are trapped. It's a place they choose, every day, with full knowledge of the cost and a conviction that what they gain is worth the price paid in frozen fingers and fuel bills and constant vigilance against the cold. The aurora is particularly brilliant that night, green and purple curtains dancing across the entire sky, and you stand outside longer than is wise, watching nature's light show with a group of villagers who've seen it thousands of times and still stop to watch. Because despite everything, the cold, the darkness, the isolation, the hardship, there's beauty here, stark and undeniable. The land that tries to kill you also offers gifts. Light shows, starry skies so brilliant they seem artificial, silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat, and a sense of place so strong it anchors people through lifetimes of winter darkness. You finally understand why humans stay at minus 71 degrees Celsius, why they press their faces against dogs for warmth and call it home. Not because they must, but because here, at the edge of human endurance, life is distilled to its essentials: warmth, food, shelter, community, beauty, and those essentials shine brighter against the frozen darkness than they ever could in comfortable tempered abundance. Oymyakon isn't where humans should be able to live, but we do anyway, stubbornly, proudly, making a home in the pole of cold because we're human and that's what we do. We survive, we adapt, and sometimes we even thrive. The evening deepens, and you're back in Mikhail's house one final time, wrapped in blankets by the wood stove, feeling the warmth seep into bones that have been cold for weeks. Tomorrow you'll leave, boarding that same small plane, flying back to a world of central heating and grocery stores and temperatures that don't require survival protocols. But tonight, you're still here, and you find yourself already nostalgic for this impossible place. The fire crackles softly, and through the small window you can still see stars, impossibly bright, impossible numerous, like someone scattered diamonds across black velvet. Mikhail's family is settling for the night, Sina already asleep, wrapped in layers on her elevated bed. His wife checking the stove one last time, banking it for the long night ahead. You think about everything you've learned. The architecture of survival, the economics of scarcity, the physiology of cold, the animals that share their warmth, the food pulled from frozen rivers, the catastrophic failures people navigate, the stubborn love that keeps them here. It's been a masterclass in human resilience, in our species' remarkable ability to make home anywhere we choose, no matter how unreasonable that choice appears. Your breathing is slowing now, the warmth and exhaustion combining to pull you towards sleep. The cold outside is constant, patient, eternal. But inside is warmth, safety, human connection, and the knowledge that we can survive almost anything when we face it together. The Yakutia horses are sleeping in their barn, the sled dogs are curled into impossible balls of fur, the village is dark except for chimney smoke rising into the frozen night, and you're drifting, finally, peacefully, into dreams. The cold will be there tomorrow and the day after and for months still to come. But so will the people who've learned to survive it, to laugh at it, to call it home. And that, perhaps, is the most remarkable thing of all. Not that humans can survive at minus 71 degrees Celsius, but that we choose to, finding meaning and beauty and belonging in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, proving that home isn't where it's easy, but where we decide it is. Rest now, warm and safe, and dream of frozen landscapes where human warmth burns brightest against the dark.